Okay, welcome to this week's module. This week we're going to create a file server and we're going to do some file server management. So before we can start, we actually have to create our file server. So we're just going to right click on our library over here and create a new virtual machine. And this is going to be a custom machine as always. And we're going to stay with our hardware compatibility as always. And the Windows operating system that we're going to be installing is going to be the Windows Server 2019. So that should be in your CNT 211 ISOs folder. So we can click on this and that's fine. And we'll click next. And we're not going to put in a product key. And this is going to be a standard Windows Server 2019, not a data center. The name for the account is going to be administrator, and the password is going to be CNT, capital CNT P at SSWRD. We'll click next. For some reason it doesn't match. Asks if we have a product key. We don't. The virtual machine's name, we'll just name this file server. And our location of where we're going to save it is going to be in our CNT 211 folder, whether that's on your desktop or in your external drive under virtual machines. And we're going to create that file server folder based off of the virtual machine. So keep it inside virtual machines, click next, say continue. We can leave this at UEFI, that's fine. Click next, number of processors doesn't really matter. Mine is set to 2 gigs. I'm actually going to bump this up to 4 gigs on mine. Again, memories based off of how much memory you have. So if you want to leave it at the 2 gigs, that's fine. We're going to use the host-only networking on this because we want this to be on the same virtual switch as our Windows Server 2019 is. So we'll click next. We can leave this as a SAS, that's fine. We can leave the NVMe, that's fine. And we're going to, of course, create a new virtual disk. We can leave this at 60, it doesn't matter. We do want this to be a single file. Click next. And we're going to browse to where this is located. And we actually want this to be in our CNT 211 virtual machines. We don't have the file server server, so we will create a new folder. Name it file server. And inside there, we will create another new folder and name it virtual disks. And then we'll store this inside that virtual disks. The difference here is we're actually going to change the name of this to hard drive 0. The reason that we're naming this hard drive 0 is because we want to know that this is our operating system hard drive. And it will matter later on. So go ahead and click next on that, and we'll hit finish. And this next part might take a little while, so we will let it do its thing. And once we get to the next part, we'll start talking about that. Okay, now that we have installed our virtual machine, you may have had to reboot because it was installing virtual tools or something like that and then log in, but you should be to this point now. So we can go ahead and close this real quick. Before we go any further, let's right click on our Windows Server 2019, which is our Active Directory server, and take a look at the settings. And note the custom VNet 1, that is the network adapter. We just want to make sure we can close that, right click on our file server, go to settings, and our network adapter, we want to make sure that we're on the same custom VNet 1. So we're going to click on custom and go to VMnet 1 and hit OK. Because we want our file server to connect to our Active Directory at some point. Okay, so now we need to go into our network adapter and open network settings, change adapter options. We're going to right click on Ethernet 0, go to properties, go to Internet Protocol version 4, open up our IP address, use a following IP, and we want our IP address to be on the same IP range as our Active Directory server. So in order to do that, let's go back to our Active Directory server. Hopefully you have that on. Most likely you guys already know what your network is, but let's just make sure for those of you that aren't paying attention. Open up our command prompt, do an IP config. Our network is our 192.168-80. Yours might be different. And the server is 10. That's important to keep in mind. So we can come back here to our file server, and we're just going to type in an IP address, 192.1. Oh, my numlock isn't on. 192.168.80. Now 10 was the address that we had before for the file or for the Windows Server 2019. We don't want that as our address. We want a different address because we can't have the same. So for this server, we're just going to name this one 20 or give this one the number of 20. So your Active Directory should be 10, your file server should be 20. Go ahead and click on the subnet mask so that it populates, and then we'll click on the preferred DNS, and that is the IP address of the server, the Active Directory server, so 80.10. So yours should look something similar to this. You might have a different network here, and that's fine. So we'll hit OK. We'll hit OK. We'll close out of this. We'll close out of this. And now we should be able to open our command prompt and ping 192.168.80.10. And we are able to ping. Now, the good news is that we're able to ping here. However, we may not be able to ping the other way because our firewall is on. So we'll open up our firewall. And we'll turn it off. Just so that we don't have any issues. And another thing, if we open up our command prompt again, if we type in hostname, you can see that our hostname is something wonky here, Windows, whatever. So we don't want that to be our hostname. So we're going to right click on our Windows icon and we're going to click on System. And we're going to rename our computer. And we want to change this to File Server. Click Next. And it will probably, yes, require a reboot. So as soon as that's done rebooting, we'll log back in. We can check our host name. through the command prompt. And there we are. It's this file server. Great. So now that we have our file server all configured the way we want it to, we can join it to the domain. To join it to the domain, we'll just right click again on our Windows icon, click on System, and we will scroll down to System Info, and we're going to click on Change Settings. Then we'll click on Change, and we'll click the Domain button, and we're going to join our domain. Now, our domain should be our last name, .com. So in my case, it's kid.com. We'll hit OK, and we'll have to type in our administrator account and our password. Hit OK, and it says welcome to the domain. And we'll go ahead and restart. And now when we log in, we actually have to click on other user because we have to sign into the domain. So we'll do our domain name /administrator and then the administrator password. And just to validate that we are actually part of the domain, we can come over here to our Windows Server and open up our Active Directory users and computers, and we can see the file server in our computers folder listed. We can also open up DNS, and if we open up our forward lookup zone, we can see our file server is listed there as well. So we are actually connected to the domain. So now we have a functioning computer that is part of the domain that we can start doing things with. However, this is a file server, and if we go into our disk management, it's not wanting to pop up, disk management, we only have our disk 0, which is our CD-ROM, or sorry, our C drive, nothing else. So can't really have a file server if we don't have any room for files to exist. So we need to create a couple extra hard drives. So in order to do that, we can close out of this. And we can add the file server a couple hard drives. So we'll right click on it and go to settings. And we'll click on add. We'll leave it at hard disk. Click next. We'll leave it as SCSI. Click next. We want this to be a new virtual disk. Click next. And this one, we only want this to be 20 gigs. And we want to store this virtual disk as a single file. Click next. We want to browse to our file server, our external drive or desktop, whichever, CNT211, virtual machines, file server, virtual disks folder. And we want to name this virtual disk hard disk 1. And click finish. And now we have ourselves a second hard disk. So if we were to come back, or if we were to hit OK, it actually ends up doing some configuration changes. And when we right click over here and go to disk management again, now we have our disk 0, and we have this disk 1, which is showing as unknown. So yeah, now that we have this disk, what we can do is we can right click on it and we can bring it online. And by bringing it online, it allows us to do things like initialize it. So we right click on it and we click initialize. When we initialize this disk, it's giving us the ability to give it a master boot record or a GPT, which would be a GUID partition table. Because of labs that we're going to be doing later on and things that we're going to be doing later on in this lab, we want to leave this as a GPT. So we select disk 1, we make sure it's GPT, and we hit OK. Now that this is initialized, you can see that it's changed here, and we have just this unallocated space. And we can right click on this and we can create a new simple volume. If we right click and create a new simple volume, we can change the size of the volume. We'll just leave this at 1024. Oops, again with my caps locks. 1024, and click next. And we can assign a drive letter. We'll leave it at E. Click next. And we can just format this as NTFS. We don't need to change the allocated unit size or the volume. We can actually change the volume label to small storage. We can perform a quick format because there's nothing that's on there. It's a brand new disk. Otherwise, we might want to do an extended length format, which would be a full format. And if we wanted to, we could enable file and folder encryption, but we don't want to do that right now. So we'll click next and hit finish. And now you see that we have our E drive, which is 1 GB in size, and it's our small storage. And then we have a bunch of extra unallocated space here as well that we can do another simple volume to, or what have you. Notice that we only have simple volumes available. We can't do spanned, striped, mirrored, or RAID 5 volumes. The reason that we can't do that is because we don't have enough disks. So if we were to actually come in here and right click on our file server and go to settings and add a second extra disk. So we'll click add hard disk, SCSI, new drive, keep this as 20, create a single storage file, click next, browse, and we're going to name this one hard disk 2. And hit finish and hit OK. Now, if we expand this a little bit, we have another second disk here. If we right click and turn this one online and we initialize this one, again, leaving it as GPT. Now we have our 18.9 gigs here, our 19.98 gigs here. If we right click on our 18.9, now we can do a span disk, we can do a striped disk, we can do a mirror disk, but we still can't do a RAID 5 volume. So again, we come over here to file server, come back here to settings, we add another hard disk, make that 20 gigs as well, store it as a single file, browse to our location and name this one hard disk 3. Click finish and hit OK. And then we right click, bring this one online, and right click again and initialize it. Leave everything as it is and hit OK. Now we have the ability to do our RAID 5. So by adding those 3 disks, we have that ability to do that. So if we were to come and minimize this and go into our File Explorer, and we click on this PC, notice that we have our local disk C, we have our DVD drive, a floppy A, and then we have this small storage E. None of the other disks are showing because inside of your File Explorer, all you see is your volumes. However, inside Disk Management, you can actually see your disks. Another way to do this would be to go into our command line Come on. For some reason it doesn't want to pop up. Let's close all this. Well, we'll just do it the hard way. If we right click in here, and we can just go into PowerShell, Windows Admin, and we do a diskpart command. And once diskpart opens, we type in list disk. We can see that we have our disk 0, which is 60 gigs with 0 bytes free. We have our disk 1, 2, and 3, which are all 20 gigs, which have their specific amounts free, and they're all set to GPT. We can also do a list volume, and we can see that we have our volume 0, which is our D drive, which is our DVD, our volume 1, which is our C drive on our disk 0, and then we have volume 3, which is an E drive, which is called small storage, and that's on our disk 1. You also have this system volume, which is set up as FAT32. That's actually just another volume that's used for USB drives and stuff. So if we go into our server manager now, we can look at our disk management through there as well by clicking on File and Server Storage. We can see our file server. We can click on volumes and it will list what volumes we have, C and E. We can look at disks and we can see the different disks that we have. And we can actually click on storage pool and see that we have different storage pools available. So right now, the only storage pool that is available is our primordial, which means that we have storage pool available as a service, and we can create our own storage pools that we want to do. So if we were to right click on this and click new storage pool, we'll just click don't show this again so that we don't have to see this. It's going to ask us for a name. So we'll call this storage pool 1. And we'll pull from our primordial storage. Click next. It's going to show us all of the different disks that we have. So we have our disks 1, 2, and 3. If we click on our first disk, it shows us that we have 20 gigs compatible. If we click on both, we have now 40 gigs. If we click on all 3, we have 60 gigs. However, we can set this up to be an automatic disk, or we could set it up as a hot spare. Hot spare just means that if one of these disks were to go bad, so if I click this as a hot spare, if this is our disk 0, or our disk 1, sorry, disk 2 and 3 would be the storage that we have available, but if disk 2 goes down, the disk 1 will take over as a hot spare. It'll just flop out. It's like removing a hard drive from a computer and sticking another one in automatically without having to do it yourself. But we'll leave this as automatic for right now, and we'll click on next. And all we have to do is hit create. And now we have ourselves a storage pool. Notice that now that we've created the storage pool, the primordial storage pool no longer exists. And when we click on storage pool 1, it shows all of the different disks that we have. So if we were to right click on this and delete the storage pool, which is a long process, okay, so now that it's deleted, we can see that we have our primordial disk back. So if we wanted to create a new storage pool, we could right click on it and click storage pool, give it a name again. So this time we'll call it storage pool 2, I guess. We'll click next. This time we can just add one specific drive to it, and we can click next. And you can see that there's no clusters, there's nothing going on, it's just a storage pool, and we can hit create and hit close. And now when we click on this, we see that we have our primordial, which has the available disks that we didn't use, and our storage pool 2, which has the disk that we used. So now we can right click on storage pool 2, and we can actually add a new virtual disk to it. So we can click virtual disk, storage pool 2, hit OK, click next. We can name this virtual disk medium storage. And if we wanted to, we can create a storage tier on this virtual disk, which enables you to automatically move from the most frequently accessed files to faster storage. We're not doing this for the purpose of faster files. This isn't like a virtual disk or a memory pool or something like that. So we're not going to click on that. We can click next. This is something called enclosure awareness. It stores a copy of your data on separate storage enclosures, helping protect your data. We don't have different types of disks. We don't have like an external disk that we're using here or something like this. This is all virtual, so we don't have to worry about that. So we'll click next. And now we have different types of storage layouts. So we can do simple storage, which is striped across the physical disks. We can notice that this uses at least one disk, but it doesn't protect you from disk failure. We can do mirrored disk, where data is striped across physical disks, creating 2 or 3 copies of your data. this actually requires that you have at least 2 disks. And then we have parity, which allows you to create basically RAID 5, which would be data striped across multiple disks with parity, meaning that it saves a copy of data in case one of those disks fail. It can recreate the data. This one requires at least 3 disks. So depending on what we want to do here, we can choose the different type. Now notice that we only had the 1 disk here. So for this, we can only do a simple disk. So when we click next on that, it gives us the opportunity to provide either thin provisioning or fixed provisioning. Thin provisioning means that, let's say for instance, you're working in an office and you currently have 20 gigs or 20 terabytes of hard drive space available for storage, but your boss has called you and said we need a new we need a new storage drive that everyone can access and save their data on. Go ahead and make it. I'm going to buy you 50 terabytes of hard drive space. It's already ordered. It's on its way. So by thin provisioning, you can actually say that the volume is 50 terabytes, even though you don't physically have 50 terabytes available, so that when those disks do come in, you can add them to that storage pool. And once they're there, then you actually do have the 50 terabytes. But that's not something that we're doing here. So again, we'll just leave this as fixed and we'll click next. If you look, notice that this has 18 gigabytes of free space. So this is our disk 1. We know that because that's how much was on disk 1. All the other disks should say 19 gigs. So we're actually going to go ahead and use all 18 gigs of available space on this. We can type in 18 gigs here, or we can just click on max size, which will give us the amount that it has. Click next, and we'll click create. And now that we've done this, we can hit close. Now it wants us to create a volume. So we're going to go ahead and click next. And we're going to click on the file server as our server. We'll click on disk 4, which is our medium storage. We'll click next. It's 18 gigs, so we'll click next. And we'll give this the drive letter of F. Click next. Again, we'll label this medium storage. Click next and create. And hit close. So now we have our storage pool 2, which is using the virtual disk of medium storage and has the volume, if we click on this PC, of medium storage. Notice that we still have our small storage here, but because small storage is there and we didn't create it using storage pools, it doesn't exist inside of our storage pool list. It exists in volumes, but not inside of our storage pool. So now if we wanted to create a span disk, something where we have 2 disks being utilized, we can come back to primordial storage, click new storage pool. We'll call this one spanned pool. Click next. We'll add both of the hard drives. Click next and click create. And we'll hit close. Now we can click on our spanned pool, create a new virtual disk. Click on spanned pool. Click next. We'll name this spanned disk. Click next, click next. With this one, we'll go ahead and do mirrored. Actually, you know what? Let's name this mirrored. How's that? Mirrored disk. We'll click on mirrored here because we do have the two drives. Click next. Leave it as fixed again because we're not going thin. This says that we have 16 gigs of available space, so we'll say OK. And we'll go ahead and hit create. Now, why did it say we had 16 gigs? There's 30 gigabytes inside that pool, or sorry, 38 gigabytes inside that pool. So why did it say that we only have 16 gigs? We'll go ahead and click next again. Click on disk 5, which is our mirrored disk. The 16 gigs is the volume size. We'll leave the drive volume as Z, and we'll call this mirrored drive. And we'll hit close. So now we have our storage pool 2, which has our medium storage. We have our spanned pool, which has our mirrored disk. And if you look at our volumes, we have our small storage, medium storage, and mirrored drive. And let's go ahead and add 3 more hard drives to our server. And again, we will use 20 gigs and a single file. Click browse, call this one hard disk. What are we at, 4? Click finish, create another one. $20 gigs, single file, browse, hard disk 5, and one more. Oops. 20 gigs, single file, hard disk 6. Okay. Now we can come back over here to storage pools. Notice that our storage pools don't have our disks listed. Neither does our disks area or our volumes area. The reason is because they're not online. So we'll go ahead and come in here and go to disk management. Again, it just doesn't want to pop up. So we'll come right click disk management and we will scroll down. And we'll turn all of these online. And we will initialize them. Notice that once they're online, you can actually initialize all 3 of them together. So again, make sure they're GPT, hit OK, and they're initialized. Now, if we click on storage pool, we might have to refresh, but there we go, primordial. And we have our 5 disks. Okay, so now we have our storage pool 2 and our span pool. Let's say that there was going to be a problem with our span pool. One of these drives was going to fail. We'd want to make sure that we could add a physical disk to this span pool. So in order to do that, what we actually want to do is we want to come over here to the physical disks section, and we want to add a physical disk. And we can go ahead and we can click on our first available disk here, and we can go to hot spare instead of automatic, and we can hit OK. And what that does is now our disk has the 2 disks available on it, plus that hot spare. So let's go ahead and we're going to minimize this for right now. Let's open up our File Explorer, and we're going to go to our C drive, and we're going to go to Program Files, and we're going to open up Common Files. And we're just going to go ahead and copy all of this. So we'll hit Control A, Control C, and we're going to come back to this PC, and we're going to go to our medium storage, and we're going to paste, hit Control V, and paste all that over. And now by having all of that, we have a bunch of different available files. If we go into, say, for instance, Microsoft Shared Ink, and we scroll down here to Alphabet, we can see that we have our Alphabet file there inside of our medium storage F. And if we open this, it will open up our Alphabet folder here, or XML file. We can also close out of that and go to, in the same folder, down to third-party notice in Latin. We can open that up, and it has ourselves a file here. So we have some different files that exist here. But what would happen if we were to have a disk failure? So let's come back to our server manager. And we want to make one of these disks go bad. Now our disks here should be disk 2 and disk 3. So if we come into our file server, click settings, and we'll just get rid of disk 2. We'll remove it. And we'll hit OK. Now that we've removed that, if we click refresh on our file server, we should see a bunch of things happen. Notice that we have error messages on our pool, on our mirrored disk, and on our physical disk. However, we do have this hot spare. So realistically, if we wait just a little bit and we click refresh, the hot spare should take over. Might have to refresh again. Nope. Still isn't refreshing, so let's right click on our disk and let's try to remove the disk that's no good. It's asking us if we want to remove it. We say yes. It says it can't remove it. So we'll try a refresh again. Still isn't working. So let's right click on our virtual disks and try to repair the disk. Notice that it is actually going through the repair process. Once the repair is done, it says it's repaired 100%. If we refresh, and it's still doing its repair. Okay, it says that it's repaired or repairing. It also shows now that we've refreshed a couple times that our bad drive is retired. So if we right click on this and remove the disk now, it should remove it. Maybe. Remove the disk. Yes. Still says it can't be removed. The replacement disk has to be set to automatic, which it is. So I don't know why it's not letting us remove it. Let's go ahead and open up our File Explorer and see if we can still see our medium storage. Nope, it says it's empty. Oh, sorry, medium storage right here. And we do have our files in there, so we can still see them. But it's just going to take a little bit of time for this to get back to a non-junk situation. We might actually even have to reboot. So let's go ahead and try that. If we click back on our file storage and click on storage pools, it's still showing an error, but the error is only on the retired disk. So now we should be able to remove this. And there we go. Now we're able to remove it. So sometimes when you have that issue, you either need to wait a really long time or just reboot the server. But once this disk is removed, we should have our virtual disk ready and available the way that it needs to be with no errors. We can see that the bad drive is no longer there and all of the warnings have disappeared. So now what we want to do is we actually want to remove these storage pools because we're going to create a new one. Now, before we can delete the storage pool, notice that if we right click on it, we can't actually delete it. Before we can delete it, we actually have to delete the virtual disks. And it won't let us delete the virtual disks without first deleting the volumes. So we have to come in here to our volume F, and we need to delete the volume F. And we'll delete our volume G, so that the only volume that we should still have is our volume C. Come back here to storage pool, and we will delete our mirrored disk. And we will come back and delete our medium storage. And then we can delete these storage pools, which will take a little bit of time. Okay, now that we're back to just our primordial drive, we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 physical disks available. If we had more than 5, we would want to remove some of them, but we only have 5, so we're good. Now let's make one storage pool with all 5 of these disks, and we are going to name this employee storage. We're going to manage it by the file server, click next. We're going to choose all of these drives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 5 of them, And we're going to set the last one up as a hot spare. And we'll go ahead and click next. Oops. And we'll hit create. And hit close. Now that we have all of our disks here, we can go ahead and create a virtual disk. Click on employee storage as our storage pool, hit OK. Click next. We're going to name it employee storage again. Click next, click next. We'll leave this as a simple volume. Click next, leave it as fixed. Click next. And we actually want this to be all of the available free space. So all 68 gigs. Click next and click create. And we'll go ahead and close. Click next. Click next. Click next. We're going to change this letter to X. Click next. And again, we're going to label this employee storage. Click next and create. We'll hit close. We can close out of this and open up File Explorer. We'll go back into our local C drive, into our program files. We're going to copy the common files folder, and then we'll open up, go to this PC, open up employee storage, and we'll paste those common files in there. So now we have our employee storage X with common files inside of that storage area. And that is what we need in order to get to the next lab, where we will be discussing storage replication. So that should give you an idea of what storage spaces looks like. Again, inside of our server manager, we can see where that storage spaces is. We can see our storage pools. We can see our volumes. We can see the disks that are available. If you open up disk management, interestingly enough, right click here and go to disk management, those 5 disks that we had before are no longer represented inside of disk management. All we have is the storage space, employee storage, that we created. No longer do you have multiple different areas. And notice also that we have this 18 gig disk 0, which is also part of employee storage. So even that extra disk that we had isn't showing up as an extra disk that's available. It's all part of that employee storage. So that's everything for this lab. We will go on next week to storage replication and show you how that stuff works. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this lab. Have a great day.